The massive, clawed hand of a Vorak warrior descended toward his shoulder, the entire hall holding its breath for the sound of crushing bone. In a room full of kings and conquerors, everyone was looking at the man holding the wrench. The giant's shadow swallowed him whole. Do you ever wonder why the loudest voices in the room are rarely the ones in control? Subscribe if you're ready to see what happens when the mask of the underdog finally slips. Now, let's go back to where the silence began. 6 hours earlier, the Zenith Spire had been nothing more than a glittering cage of diplomatic static. Archduchess Lyra smoothed the silk of her robes, her neural dampeners humming to offset the headache blooming behind her eyes. The Astrum hegemony loved their ceremonies, their high-tier energy matrices, and their endless, hollow posturing. She retreated to a side alcove, seeking the hum of machinery over the shrill laughter of ambassadors. That was where she saw him, a human. He was hunched over a flickering thermal resonance buffet, his fingers dancing through a nest of glowing filaments. He didn't look up as she approached. He wore a grease-stained jumpsuit like a suit of armor and spoke to the machine in a low, rhythmic grunt that sounded almost like a lullaby. Beside him lay a heavy, carbon-scarred multi-wrench. It was a brutal, utilitarian tool that looked entirely out of place against the spire's delicate crystal architecture. "The flux capacitor is misaligned," Lyra said, her voice carrying the practiced weight of her station. The human finally looked at her. His eyes weren't tired like hers. They were sharp, calculating the geometry of the room with a speed that made her pulse jump. "It's not the capacitor," he murmured, tapping the wrench against the casing. "It's the ego of the architects. They built for beauty, not for the heat these stars actually put out. Soft power, Archduchess. You have to work with the energy, not try to cage it." Lyra stiffened. "You know who I am. Maintenance worker? Kalen," he offered, turning back to the wires. "And I know everyone. Most people don't notice the man fixing the lights. It's a useful way to see the truth of a place." Which meant he had seen everything. Their conversation was cut short by a sound like a tectonic plate snapping. In the main hall, a Vorak delegate, a mountain of scales and biological weaponry, had erupted. A smaller delegate lay cowering as the Vorak roared, its crest flushing a lethal crimson. The guards hesitated. To fire was to start a war. To wait was to watch a murder. Kalen didn't run. He didn't even drop his wrench. He simply stepped into the center of the chaos, his gait casual, almost bored. The most dangerous creature in the galaxy isn't the one with the sharpest claws, but the one who chooses not to use them. Before the Vorak could strike, Kalen spoke. The sound was guttural, ancient, a language that hadn't been heard in the Spire for 3 centuries. It was the battle tongue of the Vorak's first ancestors. The warrior froze. "Why do we assume that strength only knows how to destroy? If this story is making you rethink power, join us as we uncover the secrets of the bridge builders." The Vorak's arm trembled. It looked down at the human, its breathing ragged, the heat of its rage radiating off its scales in visible waves. Kalen didn't flinch. He just kept speaking that low, melodic rumble, his hand resting lightly on the multi-wrench at his belt. The Vorak's chest heaved, a low vibration that Lyra felt in the soles of her boots. Slowly, the massive warrior dipped its head and pressed its secondary set of knuckles to the floor. It was a gesture of deep, ancestral respect, a submission not to a conqueror, but to a peer. The hall remained frozen as Kalen simply nodded, turned, and walked back toward his flickering drink machine as if he hadn't just stared down a living tank. Lyra's empire had spent centuries studying the Vorak through the sights of pulse rifles. Yet, in 10 seconds, a man with grease under his fingernails had achieved more than a dozen battle fleets. But the peace was short-lived. The high-domed glass of the council chamber didn't shatter. It dissolved. Radical prey terrorists, cloaked in refractive skin, dropped from the rafters like oil spills. Within heartbeats, High Warden Ignis was pinned against the dais, a thermal detonator primed at his throat. The terrorists weren't looking for credits. They were looking for blood, their fingers white-knuckled on the triggers. Kalen didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for his comms. Alpha 6 moved to the breach. Silence is the priority, he said, his voice dropping the facade of the weary technician. It was a voice that had commanded stars. Lyra felt a strange pull in her mind, a resonance. Kalen looked at her, his eyes locking onto hers with terrifying clarity. Archduchess, your neural mapping. I need the room's layout, every heartbeat, every heat signature. Can you do it? Or are you just a diplomat? She didn't hesitate. Lyra closed her eyes, letting her consciousness bleed into the spire's network. She became the walls. She became the air. She fed the data directly into Kalen's HUD as he led a surgical strike team that seemed to materialize from the shadows. Humans and Vorak moved in a synchronized, deadly ballet, guided by the man who spoke the language of monsters. True authority doesn't demand a bow. It commands the silence of the room. And now, in the smoking aftermath of the chamber, Kalen stood over the disarmed terrorists. The High Warden straightened his robes, his many-eyed gaze fixed on the maintenance worker. To the shock of every noble present, the Warden didn't offer a reward. He snapped a crisp military salute. The bridge is held, Commander Voss, the Warden said. Kalen didn't salute back. He just picked up his heavy, carbon-scarred multi-wrench from the floor where he'd dropped it before the breach. He looked at the tool, then at Lyra, a faint, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't belong to a throne or a fleet. He belonged to the gaps between them. The weight of quiet power is a heavy thing to carry, but it's the only thing that keeps the galaxy from tearing itself apart. A day later, Lyra stood on the observation deck as a nondescript shuttle cleared the spire's atmosphere. She held a small data slug Kalen had left behind, a draft for a new treaty based on cooperation rather than conquest. Her empire would change. It had to. She watched the shuttle's engines flare once before vanishing into the black, leaving her alone with the hum of the station. On the railing beside her, the light caught a faint smudge of oil he'd left behind. Even the strongest metal needs a bit of grease to keep from snapping. If Kalen's journey has taught you anything, it's that the smallest tool can fix the biggest worlds. What's the one hidden strength you're waiting to show the galaxy? We'll be here tomorrow with the next chronicle.